Have you ever wondered what would happen if you took a joke seriously and it completely changed your life? That's exactly what happened to Jake Collins, a struggling single father who turned a billionaire's casual joke into the most unexpected love story of the century. Stay with me until the end to discover how this chance encounter transformed not just two lives, but created a family that would redefine what it means to find love in the most unexpected places. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us how life's greatest moments often come when we least expect them. It was just another Tuesday morning at Coastal Coffee, the small beachside café where Jake Collins worked the morning shift. The salty ocean air drifted through the open windows as he expertly crafted lattes, his mind half focused on the coffee and half on his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, who was likely giving her grandmother a hard time about getting dressed for school. At 34, Jake's life was an endless cycle of early mornings, double shifts, and precious evenings with Emma, a far cry from the life he'd imagined for himself, but one he embraced with all his heart. Jake had been raising Emma alone since his wife died from complications during childbirth. The grief had nearly destroyed him, but Emma's existence, her tiny fingers, her eyes so like her mother's, had given him the strength to keep going. He'd moved back to his coastal hometown, taken the first job he could find, and devoted himself to ensuring Emma had everything she needed, even if that meant he sometimes went without. The bell above the door chimed, signaling the arrival of another customer. Jake glanced up from the espresso machine and froze. Even if he hadn't recognized Alexandra Winters from countless magazine covers and news segments, he would have known she was someone important. Everything about her, from her perfectly tailored charcoal suit to her confident stride, exuded power and authority. Alexandra Winters, CEO of Winters Innovation Group, had transformed her father's struggling tech company into a global empire worth billions. At 38, she was known as much for her business acumen as for her ice queen persona. Rumors suggested she'd sacrificed any chance at a personal life on the altar of corporate success. "Large black coffee, please," Alexandra said, not looking up from her phone. "And whatever pastry isn't loaded with sugar." Jake nodded, pouring the coffee and selecting a simple oat scone from the display case. "That'll be $7.50, he said, sliding the items across the counter. Alexandra finally glanced up, her steel-gray eyes meeting his. For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. Jake wasn't sure what to make of it, but he felt an unexpected jolt, like static electricity passing between them. As she handed him her credit card, her phone rang. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away from the counter. Jake couldn't help overhearing her conversation as she paced near the window. "No, I need those reports before the board meeting. I don't care if you have to stay all night. Tell Wilson I won't be rushed into this merger just because he's anxious about the quarterly numbers." The conversation continued in the same vein, her voice never raising but carrying an undeniable authority. When she finally ended the call, she returned to the counter, where Jake was waiting with her receipt. "Rough morning?" he asked, surprising himself with his boldness. Alexandra raised an eyebrow. "Every morning in this business is rough. That's how you know you're doing something right." "I don't know," Jake said with a slight smile. "I've found that if every morning is rough, maybe you're doing something wrong." Instead of the dismissive response he expected, Alexandra laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "That's an interesting perspective from someone who makes coffee for a living." "Coffee and philosophy," Jake corrected. "The philosophy is free." She studied him for a moment, then glanced at his name tag. "Well, Jake the philosopher barista, your coffee had better be as good as your insights." Jake watched as she took a sip, her eyes widening slightly. "Not bad," she admitted, which, coming from someone like her, felt like high praise. For the next 3 days, Alexandra returned to the cafe at exactly 7:15 a.m. Each visit, their exchanges grew longer and more personal. Jake learned that she was in town for a month, overseeing the acquisition of a local tech startup. Alexandra discovered that Jake had once been on track for a promising career in engineering before his wife's death had changed everything. On the fourth day, Alexandra arrived looking more stressed than usual. After ordering her coffee, she lingered at the counter. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, sliding her coffee across to her. Alexandra sighed. "My assistant quit. Family emergency, moving across the country. Now I have no one to help manage my schedule, and I'm drowning in meetings and emails." Without thinking, Jake said, "I could help." Alexandra looked at him as if he'd suggested they fly to the moon. "You?" "I have a degree in business administration," Jake explained. "And I'm good at organizing things. Plus, I could use the extra money." Alexandra seemed to consider it for a moment. "The job requires someone who can be available at all hours. You have a daughter." Jake was surprised she remembered that detail from their conversations. "I do, but I also have my mom who helps out. And it would only be temporary, right? Until you find someone permanent?" Alexandra tapped her fingers against the counter, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. 2 weeks, starting tomorrow. I'll pay you double whatever you make here." And just like that, Jake found himself working as the temporary personal assistant to one of the most powerful women in the business world. He gave notice at the café and rearranged his life to accommodate Alexandra's demanding schedule. The first few days were chaotic. Alexandra's expectations were exacting, her patience limited. She needed everything done perfectly and immediately. But Jake was no stranger to pressure, and he quickly adapted to her pace and preferences. By the end of the first week, they had fallen into a rhythm. Jake managed her calendar, prepared briefs for her meetings, and served as a buffer between Alexandra and the constant demands for her attention. He discovered that behind her icy exterior was a woman who worked harder than anyone he'd ever met, who cared deeply about her company and its impact on the world. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of back-to-back meetings, they were working late in her hotel suite. Emma was staying with Jake's mother for the night, and Alexandra had ordered dinner for them both as they prepared for the next day's negotiations. "You're surprisingly good at this," Alexandra admitted, glancing up from her laptop. "Most of my assistants crack under pressure by now." Jake smiled. "Raising a child alone after losing your spouse builds a certain kind of resilience." Alexandra's expression softened. "I can't imagine what that must have been like." "The hardest thing I've ever done," Jake said quietly. "But also the most important. Emma saved me, really. Having someone who needed me, it gave me a reason to keep going." Alexandra was silent for a moment. "I've never had that," she finally said. "Someone who needs me, I mean. The company needs me, of course, but that's different." "No family?" Jake asked, although he already knew from her file that her parents had died years ago and she had no siblings. "No one," she confirmed. "I always told myself I was focused on my career, that relationships would come later. But later kept getting pushed further away, and now." She trailed off, looking suddenly vulnerable in a way Jake hadn't seen before. "It's never too late," he said gently. Alexandra's laugh was bitter. "For someone like me? Men are either intimidated by my success or only interested in my money. And the kind of life I lead doesn't exactly lend itself to meeting someone authentic." "Maybe you're not looking in the right places," Jake suggested. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. "Maybe not," she agreed softly. The next day, Jake brought Emma to the office. It was a Saturday, but Alexandra had an emergency conference call, and his mother wasn't available. He had apologized profusely, but Alexandra had waved off his concerns. When they arrived, Emma was shy at first, hiding behind Jake's legs. But Alexandra surprised him by kneeling down to the little girl's level. "You must be Emma," she said. "Your dad has told me so much about you. Do you like drawing? I have some special paper and colored pencils in my desk. Emma nodded, her curiosity overcoming her shyness. While Jake set up for the conference call, Alexandra showed Emma how to access the art supplies and gave her a space at the conference table. During the call, Jake watched in amazement as Alexandra seamlessly managed both the high-stakes business discussion and occasional whispered interactions with Emma, who was diligently creating a masterpiece with the colored pencils. After the call ended, Alexandra leaned over to examine Emma's drawing. "This is beautiful," she said sincerely. "Is that you and your dad?" Emma nodded, pointing to the figures. "And that's you," she added, indicating a tall figure with brown hair wearing what appeared to be a crown. Alexandra looked startled. "Me? Why am I wearing a crown?" "Because Daddy says you're like the queen of business," Emma explained matter-of-factly. Alexandra's eyes met Jake's over Emma's head, a smile playing at her lips. "Does he now?" Jake felt his face grow warm. "I may have used that analogy to explain why we were working so hard. I like queens," Emma continued. "They're strong and brave." "Are you strong and brave?" "I try to be," Alexandra answered, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "My mommy was strong and brave too," Emma said. "She's in heaven now, but Daddy says she watches over us." Jake felt his throat tighten. He moved to intervene, to spare Alexandra this personal conversation, but she shook her head slightly, indicating it was okay. "I'm sure she does," Alexandra said. "And I bet she's very proud of you and your dad." Emma beamed at her, then returned to her drawing. Alexandra stood, and Jake was surprised to see moisture in her eyes. "She's extraordinary," Alexandra whispered. "Yes," Jake agreed. "She is." That day marked a turning point. Over the next week, the professional boundaries between Jake and Alexandra gradually blurred. She began asking about Emma more frequently, even suggesting they all have dinner together one evening. Jake found himself sharing stories about his life, his dreams for the future, the challenges of single parenthood. And to his surprise, Alexandra reciprocated, revealing glimpses of the woman beneath the powerful CEO exterior. He learned about her childhood as the daughter of a demanding father who had built the company from nothing. How she'd always felt she had to prove herself worthy of his legacy. The loneliness of her position, the weight of responsibility for thousands of employees. The secret fear that she'd sacrificed too much for success. With just 3 days left in Jake's temporary position, Alexandra invited him and Emma to join her for a day at the beach. It was a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday. Emma built sandcastles while Jake and Alexandra walked along the shoreline, their conversation flowing easily now. "I've been thinking," Alexandra said, gazing out at the horizon. "Would you consider coming to New York? Working for me permanently?" Jake stopped walking. "What? You're the best assistant I've ever had," she continued quickly. "I'd provide housing, excellent schools for Emma, whatever you need." Jake felt a confusing mix of emotions, flattery, disappointment, uncertainty. "Alexandra, is that all this is? A job offer?" She turned to face him, the vulnerability he'd glimpsed before now fully visible. "No," she admitted quietly. "It's not just that." "Then what is it?" Alexandra took a deep breath. "I don't know how to do this. I've never felt this way about anyone before. These past weeks with you and Emma, I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in years." Jake's heart raced. "Alexandra. I know it's crazy," she interrupted. "We barely know each other. You have Emma to consider. And I'm not exactly an easy person to be with. But I thought maybe, if we had more time." Jake reached out, taking her hand. "I feel it too," he said simply. Her eyes widened, hope and fear battling in their depths. "You do?" "Yes. But you're right, there's Emma to consider, and our lives are so different. I can't just uproot her on a whim. Alexandra nodded, disappointment evident in her expression. I understand. It was a silly idea anyway. I didn't say no, Jake clarified. I just need time to think about it. To figure out what's best for everyone. Hope flickered across her face again. Of course. Take all the time you need. That evening, after putting Emma to bed, Jake sat on his porch, staring at the stars and trying to make sense of his feelings. He was undeniably attracted to Alexandra, and not just physically. There was a connection between them that had grown stronger each day. But was it enough to build a future on? And what about Emma? She seemed to adore Alexandra, but moving to New York, entering Alexandra's high-pressure world, would that be good for her? His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra, "Can't sleep. Thinking about our conversation. No pressure, just wanted to say that whatever you decide, knowing you and Emma has changed me. For the better, I hope." Jake smiled at the screen, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He typed back, "We're thinking about you too. More tomorrow." The next day was Sunday, Alexandra's only day off. She had invited Jake and Emma to brunch at her hotel, and despite his conflicted feelings, Jake had accepted. When they arrived, he was surprised to find Alexandra waiting in the lobby rather than in the restaurant. "Change of plans," she announced. "I thought we might go on a little adventure instead." That little adventure turned out to be a helicopter ride along the coastline, followed by a picnic in a secluded cove accessible only by boat. Emma was beside herself with excitement, especially when Alexandra presented her with a child-sized snorkel set and taught her how to use it in the shallow waters. Jake watched them together, Alexandra patiently answering Emma's endless questions about fish and shells, and felt something shift inside him. This powerful, brilliant woman who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar deals was on her knees in the sand, helping his daughter examine a tiny hermit crab with the same intensity she might give to a complex contract. Later, as Emma napped on the picnic blanket, Alexandra and Jake sat side by side, watching the waves. "Thank you for today," Jake said. "I've never seen Emma so happy." Alexandra smiled. "She makes it easy. She's so curious about everything." "Like her mother," Jake said softly. "Lisa was a marine biologist. She would have loved this place." Alexandra was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about her. If you don't mind." Jake found, to his surprise, that he didn't mind at all. He told Alexandra about Lisa, her passion for the ocean, her infectious laugh, how they'd met in college and fallen in love over late-night study sessions and early morning surfing. "She sounds wonderful," Alexandra said when he finished. "Emma has her spirit." "Yes," Jake agreed. "She does." "Jake," Alexandra began hesitantly, "I want you to know that I would never try to replace Lisa in Emma's life. If you did decide to come to New York, I would respect her memory and make sure Emma always knows about her mother." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep in Jake's heart. "I believe you," he said. And he did. They returned to the mainland as the sun was setting, Emma chattering excitedly about everything they'd seen. Alexandra had arranged for a car to take them home, and she walked them to it. "Will you come see us tomorrow?" Emma asked, looking up at Alexandra with hopeful eyes. Alexandra glanced at Jake, uncertain. "If your dad says it's okay." "Please, Daddy." Emma pleaded. Jake smiled. "Of course. It's our last day working together, after all." A shadow crossed Alexandra's face at the reminder, but she quickly masked it with a smile for Emma's benefit. "I'll see you both in the morning, then." That night, after Emma was asleep, Jake made his decision. He would not go to New York with Alexandra. Not because he didn't care for her, he did, more than he'd thought possible after Lisa, but because he couldn't risk Emma's stability for a relationship that was still so new, so untested. They lived in different worlds, and trying to merge them might end in heartbreak for everyone. The next morning, he arrived at Alexandra's office prepared to give her his answer. But before he could speak, she handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," she said, her expression unreadable. Inside was a job offer, not as her personal assistant, but as the head of a new foundation she was establishing. The Winters Foundation for Family Support would provide resources and assistance to single parents, particularly those who had lost a spouse. The headquarters would be based in their coastal town, not New York. "I don't understand," Jake said, looking up from the